pleasure to introduce Delegate Chris Head, who's the Republican candidate for Virginia's 3rd Senate District. But Chris has been representing the 17th District in the Virginia House of Delegates since 2012 and currently serves as the Vice Chair of the House Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions. He also serves on the committees on Commerce and Energy, Privileges and Elections, and Rules, and chairs several subcommittees. Throughout his tenure in the House of Delegates, Chris has been a stalwart defender of the unborn, protector of the Second Amendment, and champion for limited government. As your state senator, Chris will continue to be a strong conservative voice for traditional Virginia values in Richmond. A husband, father, grandfather, and business owner who lives in Botetourt County and owns a senior care business in Roanoke along with Betsy, his wife, for 33 years. They are the proud parents of 3 adult children and equally proud grandparents. At this time, I invite Chris to share his campaign visions and reasons for why he wishes to run for Senate.
Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It is great to be with you tonight. I walked in here and saw this, and I got pretty nostalgic seeing the organ over here. I'm from a little community in North Georgia called Dry Pond. You won't find Dry Pond on the map. It's a little. The name sort of says it all. And I will tell people when they ask where you're from. Generally, I'll tell them I'm from Commerce, and that's really important as far as relating to Covington, because Commerce and Covington have an awful lot in common. I'll come back to that. But this organ struck me when I walked in here because I grew up going to Dry Pond Methodist Church. And this is a little bitty country church. We got air conditioning when I think I was 15 when they put air conditioning in the building. The only heat we had when I was growing up was 4 space heaters that were in it, and it would get pretty cold sometimes. And I can remember sitting listening to the preacher on Sunday morning, huddled together, everybody still in their coats on, where literally I could watch the preacher preach when you could see the steam coming out of his mouth. Everybody was so cold in the sanctuary. And for the longest time in the sanctuary, the only thing that we had to play was a pump organ like this. And so I know that, and my cousin Adele Head was the pianist and organist. The piano was back in the Sunday school room, so that's a throwback for me to be able to see a pump organ like that, because they're near and dear to my heart. But I went to Commerce High School, graduated from there, and Commerce is a town, again, almost the same exact size as Covington. And it's also an industry town, but being in North Georgia, it's a mill town rather than the paper mill or any other industrial area. It was textile mills, and Bluebell and Harmony Grove mills were the 2 mills that were there, and that's what Commerce revolved around. And growing up, going there, one of the jobs I had in high school was working the soda fountain at Commerce Drugstore. And that was the place, and I have no doubt that there used to be a drugstore with a soda fountain somewhere in Covington. I've never asked, but I've never seen a small town like this that didn't have one back in the day at some point along. And that was where I learned a lot about how things are supposed to run, because I would work there in the afternoons, and the ladies would come in the afternoon, and they had their afternoon coffee club, and you'd have to sit and serve them. But then at 5 o'clock, the people that ran the town would get off, and they'd come by and get a cup of coffee and sit and talk about things on their way home. And as I didn't even know I was getting such an education as I did, as I was serving coffee and getting them whatever else they wanted. And some of them were even sitting there before they lived by themselves. Some of the older gentlemen who were widowers at that point. But as they talked about what was going on in politics in the world and business and things in state politics, and as I was going along, once in a while they'd look up and go, "Do you understand that, Chris?" And I would say either "I think so" or "No," and then they would start telling me about it. And I learned so much from the people in that small town, and it has served me extraordinarily well over the years. Went to the University of Georgia, finished there, and then thought I was going to be a Georgia resident, but had started a business that I ran for a while, did real well with that, and then sold it to go into full-time ministry. And as I was starting that, started dating a young woman that I had known in college, and she had just finished her seminary training at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and was hired to be the Baptist campus minister at Longwood College, it was at the time. And for a year, she was there and I was in Atlanta, and we were dating long distance. And then Heritage Baptist Church in Farmville decided that they would have me be their minister of music and youth, and that's going to be just fine because that meant I could come up here and I could marry that girl. And we've been married now for 34 years. Stayed in that for a while vocationally, thought I was going to be there for a while, forever. I mean, I really thought that was going to be my calling, but I'd also been in business before. Kids started coming along. I ended up going to work for Xerox. Xerox moved me to Roanoke, and Betsy was a stay-at-home mom for a little while. And then after a while, that pull of being in two places, are you in ministry or are you in business? Are you in ministry and in business? We found the opportunity to open a business that sort of put us in both worlds, and that was opening 2 franchise locations of a company called Home Instead. That gave us the opportunity to provide in-home care for senior adults, so that we hire caregivers and provide, in essence, assisted living services at home as an alternative to going to a facility. And we've been doing that for the last 22 years. That is what led me to serving in the legislature, because when we opened our business, we ran into so many regulatory barriers that the regulations for home care were impossible for us to run through. And I got to know, my delegate at the time was William Fralin, and then I also got to know Morgan Griffith, who is now Congressman Griffith. And Morgan helped me tremendously working through the regulations and getting them revised. And we went through about a 3-year process, getting revisions done. It was a long, arduous process. And Morgan told me when we got started, he said, I will continue to open doors for you. You're going to have to walk through them, but I'll keep opening them as you keep walking through and we'll get this changed. And we did over 3 years, got a lot of revisions done. And then one Saturday morning, I picked up the paper, and much to my surprise, I looked down and there was William Fralin's picture. And it said that William had announced his retirement from the House of Delegates. And the first thing I thought when I saw that was, I ought to run. And so I picked up the paper and I held it like this to my wife, who was sitting drinking a cup of coffee, and I said, did you see this? And she said, yeah, I did. You want to run for it? I think maybe you ought to. Words she has regretted every day. But that was in 2009. I did enter the race that year, and it ended up being a 5-way Republican primary, and I did not win. I finished second behind Bill Cleveland. And I thought that was it. I had jumped in, I had learned a lot, met a lot, got much more involved in the party process, and I stayed involved with that, supported Bill, thought that was fine. I think he did a fine job. But his wife fell ill just after he was nominated, and he was not able to serve but 1 term. And he is now about to retire, as I understand it, but he's now a general district court judge down in Botetourt County. But when he was then, 2 years later, announcing his retirement, I got a phone call just before he did that, and it was from Delegate Greg Habib. And Greg said, so you're up. And I said, what do you mean you're up? And he said, you're up. Bill's going to announce his retirement, that he's not running again, and if you're ever going to do it, and we'd like for you to, you're up. And I said, well, okay. And that time, nobody else ran for the nomination. Previously, it had been 5. It was just me at that time. And then I was elected that fall and been serving ever since. So the last 12 years, I've served in the House of Delegates representing the 17th District. And the things that I've worked on the most have been trying to promote small business, trying to reduce regulatory barriers, trying to keep taxes as low as possible, working an awful lot in the senior adult space, because I know that's not only near and dear to my heart because of the industry that I've worked in for the last 22 years, but in this part of the state, we are disproportionately older than the rest of the Commonwealth, and we need to be taking care of our seniors, and we need to be working really hard to make sure that the things are there to allow senior adults to get the care that they need. And there's a lot of things that get in the way of that. And so I've been trying to work through a lot of things that will help move that along and lower, again, regulatory barriers and trying to keep costs down. And make sure that the things are there that they need to. And working with elder abuse is another area that I've done a lot of work in, because there's just a lot of opportunity for people to be taken advantage of. I was just actually this morning in a meeting with the Attorney General and a group that he had pulled together to talk about combating elder abuse in the Commonwealth. And he made a really interesting comment. He said, if you look around at all of the cultures of the world, Western civilization, Western Europe and North America, are unique in a way that's not real good, and that is that we are the only cultures that don't revere our elders. Everybody else, Asian, Latin American, African, all hold their seniors up and on a high pedestal. We just don't do that anymore. And we used to. That's a trend that has happened over the last 60 years or so. Not one I like. I like it less now because I'm in my 60s now, so I like it a lot less that we don't revere elders. But it's really important for us to take care of senior adults, and so that's always been a part of things. But it's also important that we teach our young and that we teach our children those histories, because the part of the reason that that's important is, with I think revering elders, is the stories that they tell, the stories that they know, the things that they've experienced. And I am, again, having a ministry background. First and foremost, my Christian faith is what drives what I do. And when you look at Scripture, it tells you repeatedly that when Moses was trying to set things up, and he said, when you're doing this, you need to tell the stories. You need to tell the stories, and you need to repeat it over and over again, to the point that it says in the Bible that you should take these commandments and you nail them on the door, and wear them on your arm, and wear them on your head, and teach your children about them, and tell them all the stories about what you went through, and tell them all the reasons why it's important, because if you'll do that, they'll learn. And if you stop doing that, then they're going to go astray. And I think you can look at some of what's going on in the world today that makes most of us that are, if you're over 50, I think that a lot of people are looking around the world today and are just bewildered at some of the things that are happening. But part of that is that our kids have not been being taught what happens when you veer away from foundational values. And it's not the first time in the history of the world that this has happened. And it's having the same results that it always happens when you veer away from those things that are foundational. So that's how I got to where I am. Now, the running for Senate, when we did the redistricting the last time around after the last census, we had changed up the way it was going to be done. You may recall the constitutional amendment that was on the ballot that brought forth a redistricting commission. Previously, all the redistricting had been done with the House and Senate would work together and draw the maps, come up with a plan, and then they would vote on it and approve it, and it would be then reviewed and approved by the governor, and then reviewed by the Justice Department, and those were the maps. But you ended up with a lot of really strange gerrymandering. You all have experienced that in the Senate district that you are currently in, that Senator Deeds is in. And if you look at that, it's you've got Bath County and Allegheny County and Covington, and then you've got this portion of Rockbridge and this portion of Nelson that leads you over to Charlottesville, so you can get all of Charlottesville and Allegheny County or Albemarle County, and you get that so that was drawn to be a Democrat seat, and that's one party control, and so both parties were guilty of this, and the idea was by going to a nonpartisan or fully actual bipartisan commission, that we would end up with better lines and the gerrymandering would end. The problem was that the commission was not able to come to any sort of agreement. They argued and argued and argued and finally threw their hands up in disgust and said we quit. And fortunately, in drafting the legislation that led to that constitutional amendment, in case that happened, then it would get kicked over to the state Supreme Court and they would draw the maps. Well, it got kicked over to them. They brought in a Republican map maker and a Democrat map maker, and they sat them down and they said, go draw us maps, and here's all you're going to do. We want you to make sure that you have all the districts have the same population as they're supposed to. Make sure that they are as compact and contiguous as they can be. Keep together communities of interest as much as possible, and so that you don't have some crazy things like that. And the last thing that they added was pay absolutely no attention to any incumbents. And that was the piece that sort of set things on its ear when we got the new districts. And as a result of that, in the House, my old district, current District 17, was broken into 5 pieces. And I was left living in an area that the only part of my old district that was in the district that I was now gone into was the precinct that I lived in Washington County. And I was paired in with Terry Austin, who I had served with for 10 years of the 12 that I served. And Terry is a great guy, and I worked with him a lot, and I thought brought an awful lot to the table because while I'm vice chair of health welfare institutions and serve on some strong committees, commerce and energy, and privileges and elections, Terry's chairman of transportation and vice chair of appropriations, and that's really important for this region to have those things being looked after by somebody that is from here and overseeing these things. And that just makes a lot of sense for me to want to go up against Terry. But then looking at the Senate maps, realized that there's this new Senate district that is an open seat because the new Senate District 3, the geography is currently represented by 5 different senators. Part of it is currently served by Emmett Hanger, part by Creed Deeds, part of it by Steve Newman, part of it by Dave Suderline, and part of it by John Edwards. But none of them live in the district. And I did. And as I was noodling on that, then Congressman Ben Cline, who I'd also served with for a long time in the House, has been a good friend for a long time, called me and said, "Have you looked at the maps?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, would you think about running for Senate? I think you ought to consider that. And I talked with him about that for about a month and talked with Morgan about that as well. And they were very gracious. And so February of 22, a year and a half ago, I announced that I was going to be running for this seat and not running for re-election in the House of Delegates. And I was very honored and blessed to have both of them sitting beside me and supporting me from that very first announcement. And I have been taking the last 18 months to try to get to as many places and people as I possibly can. And it's been wonderful getting to know everybody. The difficulty is there's just an awful lot of communities to get to know, and not enough time to get deeply into any of them yet. Fortunately, a Senate term is 4 years, and if I am afforded the opportunity to represent you in that capacity, I promise you I'll keep showing up whenever I'm invited and whenever we can to make sure we get to know the people in all these areas. But this district is the top half of Roanoke County, all of Botetourt County, all of Craig County, all of Allegheny County and Covington, all of Rockbridge County, Buena Vista and Lexington, 25% of Augusta County, all of the city of Stanton, all of the city of Waynesboro. So if you think about that, it's a huge district. I mapped it out one day just to see, and as the crow flies, it's not quite this far, but if you wanted to drive it from the top end of Waynesboro in the northeasternmost corner to the most southwestern portion, which is in Craig County, about 6 miles north of the town of Blacksburg, you've got there to drive that is, I think, 147 miles one end to the other, and it's a big district. And it is such a unique district because Covington, I told you I'm from Dry Pond, okay? For me, going to Commerce, where I went to high school, was going to town. You got a lot of little communities around here where coming to Covington is going to town, right? And that's what this whole district is like, because it's either going to town means going to either Covington, or Lexington, or Buena Vista, or Stanton, or Waynesboro. Those are the going to town places. Maybe to Roanoke if you're going to the big city, right? And that's, they got them all. Those are the things that it's getting to know communities that are so much like where I grew up, and driving around. And I thought, having lived here for 27 years and run up and down the roads and run off and hiked in trails and things, I thought I knew a lot of this area really, really well. I have learned that I don't even begin to know as much as I need to know, and I'm looking so forward to getting to know these communities and being a part of that, so I can get to know the people and get to know what's on your mind. Now, I can give you a legislative agenda, but I think rather than that, knowing what I have always worked on are going to continue to be the things that I have always worked on. The values that I've always had are going to continue to be the values that I've had. But I have found in the time that I've been in the House of Delegates that the best way to get the best legislation that's most impactful is to talk to and listen to the constituents that are out there and find out what they are needing. What does the town of Covington need? What does Goshen need? What do we have to have? What does Clifton Forge need? What are you going to have to make things better? And individuals in specific industries specific companies can give you some great ideas from that. I was out campaigning. I'll give you two examples of this. I was out campaigning a few years back, probably 5 or 6 years back, and door knocking, asking for a fellow for his vote, and leaving in this. I said, if I can do anything, let me know. And he said, that's great. Walked down to the end of the drive to the walkway, and then he hollered back and said, there is this one thing. And I said, what's that? And I walked back, and he said, I'm an HVAC contractor by trade. And I said, okay. And he said, and we have to take continuing education classes. And I said, right. And he said, and that's fine. Okay. He said, but we have to take those classes once every 2 years. I said, okay. And he said, that's okay, except that the classes are on changes to the statewide uniform building code. And that's only revised every 3 years. And what that means is that every other time I take a class, it's a class I've already taken. So wouldn't it make more sense for us to put the mandatory classes on the same schedule as the revision to the uniform building code? And I said, that seems like a pretty good idea. Well, I drafted a bill and carried it forward. Now, you'd think that would have been an easy one to get through. It actually ended up getting a lot of attention, but ultimately we got that done, and it applied not just to HVAC contractors, but to everybody that D-Corps certifies. We just switched all of the things over so that they looked at everything and got it in sync with what they're being trained on, so that it evened things up. That's a small thing, but it makes a real difference to the lives of the people that are having to go do that, because you're wasting a lot of people's time. Time is extraordinary value. And that's the one thing that we don't have enough of. Now, another one that came to me from a constituent was a fellow that owns a couple of franchises of an urgent care center. Where you can go in and see the doctor instead of having to go to make an appointment. Then you can go in and see the doctor. And he said, we have a problem with credentialing. And I said, explain. And he said, the health insurance plans, when a doctor leaves one place and comes to another place, they want us, before they will pay any of the claims, for us to verify that this doc has been credentialed and has the appropriate credentials to get that done. I said, okay. And he said, and until they have their approval from the insurance company, we can't bill for any of the services that we're providing, which means either we can't use the doc and we got to pay the doc's salary and they can't do anything, or the doc's going to be providing services for free and we can't do anything with that either because we can't bill them. And I said, okay, how long is this taking? And he said, anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And he said, the real problem is that the doctors, frequently, if it was Optima or Anthem that were credentialing them, they were already credentialed at this other place that they were working. They know that they have all the credentials. And now they're moving over to this new place, and instead of just transferring over, they start the whole process over again. And it was a way that they were not having to pay the claims and delaying that. And I said, that doesn't sound like a good plan. So we put together legislation that said, take as long as you want. But as soon as they verify that they were credentialed on the date that they started, they get to go back and retroactively bill for everything that they did so that you can go back and get paid, so that the practice is able to get this done. Well, again, that took a lot of effort to get it through. But here's what's amazing. Across the Commonwealth now, instead of taking 6 to 9 months, the average for credentialing is taking 7 to 10 days. And it has made a huge difference for the health practice, which has lowered things down. And I was told by the Hospital Association that it's lowered the cost of health care. That was not my idea. There was a constituent that brought that to me. And that's the best legislation, comes from the people that are out there. And so I think the job of the legislator is to listen to constituents. And when you've got an idea or a concern, bring it to us, because that's our job, is to listen and see if we can move the stones. Sometimes it takes legislation. Oftentimes it doesn't. Oftentimes it's just making a phone call to an agency to remove a barrier, or to help somebody understand how to chart through some of the morass of entanglement that you get with government, and we've got ways that we can help do that. But that's the important part. I think it's the role of the legislature, is to be able to represent that. And then further, to make sure that this area in Richmond is represented, and that the concerns that are unique to here. Life isn't the same here as it is in Fairfax County. It's just not, We all know that. They don't. It's up to me to tell them when I'm out there representing that. When they start mouthing off about how things have to be done, I go, all right, let me tell you why that doesn't work out here. job of the legislator, and that's what I want to be able to do. But that's, I'll now would love to have an opportunity to hear questions from you, and